Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Candidates. I'm Danny Vittori, and on today's episode we have District Attorney candidate Paul Tucker. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Of course. So would you mind just taking a minute to tell the voters a little bit about yourself, like who you are?
Thank you. So my name is Paul Tucker. I'm running for the open seat for District Attorney. Our current District Attorney, John Blodgett, is retiring. I had a 32-year career with the Salem Police Department. Most of my career I spent as an investigator, as a detective. In fact, for 17 of those years, I was the chief of the Detective Bureau, and for the last 5, I was the police chief. And as a detective, I worked very closely with the DA's office, part of the prosecution team in over 1,000 cases. I've been an attorney for just about 22 years. It will be 22 years in a couple of months. As a police chief, we did some really innovative things in Salem. I oversaw a department of 115 employees, $10 million budget. Did some really innovative things back in 2009 when I was appointed that a lot of departments are just starting to do now, bringing mental health clinicians on board, recognizing the opiate epidemic, recognizing mental health challenges. And then in 2014, I ran for state representative, and I'm in my 8th year as a state rep. I represent Salem at the State House, work with great colleagues here in Lynn, Rep. Capano, Rep. Cahill, and Senator Crichton have been good friends and great colleagues. And I think that my experience, all what I've done in my police career, my legislative career as an attorney, I'm in my 22nd year teaching at Salem State and North Shore Community College. I teach criminal law, so I just hope that the voters of Lynn and all your viewers, when they take a look at this, they see that my experience lines up perfectly with the job of what the district attorney does.
Great, thank you. And what do you believe is the main job of the DA for the 34 cities and towns?
It's really about being fair and seeking justice for all. It's also about standing up for victims, being a voice for victims. The DA is the chief law enforcement officer of the county, which is directly on point to my background, and it's standing up for folks who have been impacted by crime. It's also making sure that we do our best to try to keep people out of the system, particularly juveniles and young men and women. Sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes they do things that they regret, and they end up with a record that tails them all the way through, from housing to employment to trying to join the military. The longer that we can keep people out of the system, the better outcomes there are for people. It's what I've done as the police chief. We've had mental health clinicians in the police cruisers working, something that Lynn is actually moving toward now, trying to keep people out of the system. I also think it's important that we retain our assistant DAs, make sure that they're compensated fairly, and make sure that they have the tools to do their job. And then the last piece, I think, mainly is prevention of crime. We really need to do everything we can to stop crime before it starts. All of these things are what I've done in my career.
Great, thank you. And you'd mentioned a little before, but what would your approach be to handling the opiate crisis, the epidemic that's been?
I think we need to know the difference between somebody who is in the recovery community, somebody who's in the grip of addiction, and we all know these people. But there's a world of difference between somebody who is battling addiction, who needs our help, they need our support, versus somebody who is trafficking in these substances that are taking people's lives, like fentanyl. I've done a lot of work at the State House to increase the penalties for trafficking in fentanyl. So if I could boil it down to this, as a district attorney and as a criminal justice system, we need to make sure that we take care of those folks who are in recovery and trying to kick this awful addiction that's touched so many people, and making sure that we hold people accountable for their behavior that are selling and trafficking this. This is we lost 2,300 people last year in Massachusetts, mostly to fentanyl, and it's something, those numbers are not going down. So as a DA, I would fight every single day for the folks to make sure we have treatment options, make sure we support these folks, and make sure we hold offenders accountable that are putting this stuff on the street.
Yep, great. And you touched on it a little before, but what would you say would be your top 3 issues to tackle as DA?
I think the first is making sure we have a robust juvenile and adolescent crime unit to try to keep people out. One of the things that we've seen is the longer that we can keep someone out of the system, so much better outcomes. If we can keep them out into their mid-20s, if somebody does not enter the system, we have a school-to-prison pipeline. We have folks that are getting in trouble for minor things, and because of the system they get caught up in, it ends up taking them all the way through to incarceration. We need to stop that. The second part is working on reentry programs, and that's something that I would work with Sheriff Coppinger on and other county sheriffs across the state. I got some money for a pilot program 2 terms ago to work on reentry, to work with men and women who are coming out of the incarceration system, to set them up for success and not failure. Sometimes it's just getting them a mass ID, a state ID, a place to live, a job prospect, rather than have them step out onto the street after serving their time and saying, where do I go from here? The third is retention of assistant DAs. It's been a problem mainly because of the pay. It's not that these men and women don't like the job. I think they do. I think they come in with a passion for it. But when you come out of law school and your law school loans are 2 and 3 times what you're making in a yearly salary, and I will say, and I think what shows my always striving to be fair, at the State House, I've advocated for increasing the compensation for our public defense bar, the folks in Committee for Public Counsel Services, the folks who are the bar advocates. I've advocated strongly to have their compensation raised as well. I think it comes out to a better system. We have an adversarial system, and when we have really good people, men and women who are committed on both sides of that equation, I think we end up with a better outcome for justice.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's awesome. Good. And what would you say, or how do you think we should deal with nonviolent offenders? I think
we need to look for individual justice. When we talk about nonviolent crimes, what we're really looking at is boiling it down to what we refer to as quality of life crimes. And in Salem with the police department, when we started with the mental health unit, what we would do is, rather than bring these folks into the station and then have them end up at court and cycle through Middleton, where they present 2 or 3 months later at the cost, by the way, of thousands of dollars of keeping them. This was back in '09. Mm-hmm. And then they present back on the streets of Salem and Lynn and Beverly and the streets of Essex County with the same issues that they went in with. So what we did was try to break that cycle, and rather than bring them to court, we would get them help. We contracted with nonprofits. So those are some of the things I think that we really need to look at. When we talk about low-level offenders, we can also look at evidence-based programs like restorative justice, where you have somebody who's been impacted by crime in a nonviolent way, and they get to sit across almost the same as we are and talk to the person who committed some crime against them. I've seen this work, and as long as it's done appropriately, there is some consequences for the offenders, and they learn what their behavior has caused to other people. There are so many programs out there that we really, I think, need to make more investment in, and it's something I've spent an awful lot of time on, and we can do some really good. I do not subscribe to what one former district attorney had, which was a non-prosecution list. I do not subscribe to that. I'm not sure that helps anybody, the offender or society. Right. I think what we need is individual-based look at an offender. What's the best outcome? What can we do to help them to succeed? I talked to Kevin Burke, who was the former DA before John Blodgett, and he said something that resonated to me. He said, better outcomes for offenders is better outcomes for society and public safety. It's as simple as that. And Kevin Burke is somebody who's endorsed me, and I'm happy to have his endorsement. I think when we take a look at these individual offenders, we get to the root of the problem. If we can somehow eradicate that and address it, it's better outcomes for everyone.
Great. So, and going a little bit off that, how would you decide which cases get top priority? So you would see a lot as DA.
I think when we divide out, and you correctly mentioned the low-level offenders, and everyone deserves attention, individual justice, but I think that we also need to prioritize, particularly if we have some type of a serial criminal who's causing a number of issues, if we see a spike in gang violence, if we see a spike in gun violence. I know that we've had really good success with some of these specialty courts. We have gun court in some counties. We have drug court. They have been very, very successful, not only in moving cases more expeditiously, fairly, but expeditiously, rather than have cases languish for such a long time. And honestly, if somebody is being held, they're on the jail side and they're being held pre-trial, I think we need to try to move their cases as quickly as we can. And oftentimes, the numbers of folks that are held pre-trial, that number gets pretty high sometimes. And it's the system that has backup. We've had a lot of difficulties trying to move cases through COVID. And I think the court system is doing the best that they can to move cases, but there are priority cases that you can move forward.
Okay, right. And going off that, what are the major sources of crime you would wish to focus on?
I think a lot of it, if it's either drug-fueled crime, which we have seen, and I've been on the job professionally for long enough to have seen the crack epidemic in the 80s, the OxyContins that hit in the 90s, and now the fentanyl. Oftentimes, those are all precursors for crime. We've seen so many people that get hurt on the job or they get hurt in an accident and they end up getting hooked on these OxyContins that our Attorney General has gone after the manufacturers of. And then when they can't get those prescriptions anymore, it's an easy step to start going to some of these opiate products. That's the folks that we need to help. Those are the folks that we need to get the treatment for. For too long in this country, we had a punishment-based system. We missed the treatment, we missed the rehabilitation. We missed, frankly, supporting these folks and trying to get them back into society as full and sustaining members. So I would focus on all those types of crimes. I also would focus on violent crime. We're very fortunate in Massachusetts. We have the lowest per capita incarceration rate in the country. We also have the lowest per capita gun violence, and that's not by mistake. We've done some really good work in this state, from the legislature to police officers. We are blessed, particularly in the North Shore. We have excellent professional police officers, and it is part of a system. It's not silos. That's why we call it the criminal justice system. When everybody is working together, doing their job, and frankly, the defense bar, when they're doing their job, we end up with a better system, a better quality of justice. And I think that's something in Massachusetts that we can be proud of.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned it a little before, but why do you think that your qualifications put you in the best position to become the DA?
So I just ask people to take a look at what I've done in my professional life. I've spent my entire adult life in public service. So my years on the police department, many years as a detective, I sat with victims of crime. I sat in their living rooms. I sat at their kitchen tables. I've heard firsthand the impact of crime. That makes an impression on somebody. The DA is the voice of victims for making sure that victims of crimes are heard. My budget experience, my managerial experience, I'm the only candidate in this race that has led a very large organization and had to make all the really difficult decisions that come along with that. I know the budget. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee at the State House. I know how to get things done. Legislatively, I've served on every committee that touches upon the DA's office. I've served on the Judiciary Committee, Public Safety, Homeland Security. I currently sit on the Mental Health, Substance Use Disorder and Recovery Committee. All of these things, including my teaching at the college and university level, I think position me perfectly for the job of district attorney. I'm the only candidate in this race that also has worked exclusively with the DA's office as part of the prosecution team, working case prep from arrest all the way through to verdict. I was on the domestic violence assessment team for the DA's office, and every case that went through under Salem PD, I had a hand in it. Of all the felony cases as the captain that oversaw every investigation. I think that fits perfectly with the job of the district attorney.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you mentioned it a little before, but how do you think how would you use your previous interactions and experience with law enforcement in your position as DA?
I'm very proud to say that I've received the endorsement from the State Police Association of Massachusetts. I've received the unanimous endorsement of the Essex County Chiefs Association, and I've received the endorsement of the Massachusetts Major City Chiefs. Those are three extraordinary organizations, and I'm proud to have their endorsement. I was a police officer for a total of 34 years, 32 of those in Salem. I know the job, I know the inside and out. I've had to make a lot of difficult calls in my career. I've never been afraid to, I've never shied away from it, but people know where I stand. I think one thing that separates me from my opponent, I have a very public record of making tough decisions, taking tough votes, but also standing by them and doing my homework. My interactions with law enforcement have always been professional, and if I am fortunate enough to be elected district attorney, it's a good balance between the law enforcement and the prosecution side, and I know I'll be able to work with everyone in Essex County.
Mm-hmm. Great. Our one final question is, how would you take the vision that you have for DA, your vision, and turn it into a reality?
So when I took over as police chief, the previous chief before me had served for 25 years as chief. And when I came in and started my service as police chief, I wanted to do some innovative things. I wanted to build upon the great success that my predecessor had. I would like to do that here as well, build on the success that Kevin Burke started, which was built further by John Blodgett. I'd like to take that next step. I've been an innovator at every point in my professional career. I want to look at evidence-based programs. We're looking at how can we best serve juveniles, how can we best serve folks who are in the grip of addiction. These are things that I've done my entire life, and I think that I can build upon the success of the two previous DAs and take them even further.
Great. Awesome. And I want to thank you again for coming on the show. This has been great. I think definitely tells the voters a lot about you.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Your questions were excellent, and these are the questions that the folks are asking, and I appreciate the opportunity to explain my positions.
Yeah, of course. And thank you again. And once again, I am Danny Vittori. This has been Conversations with Candidates. Please join us again next time when we talk with more of the candidates.